Anya, we'll start with you. So can you tell me what's the scene about?
So the play overall is about how the justice system treats women within the facility. And this scene is the very first scene, but it's a non-linear structure. So we are introduced to Maggie, who's a mother, and this new police officer who's new to the scene. And we basically discovered that Maggie's daughter has killed herself because mental health within the institutions is not treated accordingly. The police officer doesn't actually have a lot of information, and she walks in and basically just tries to give her the news, and she just wants to get out as soon as possible. This scene is actually based loosely off a real life event that happened. So basically they got the name of her sister wrong, and they couldn't even tell if she was dead or injured. So they've incorporated that into this play, and it's really important to point out how in this scene that she didn't actually get that answer. The police officer was important in this scene because she kind of represents community within the play. So she kind of talks to people and gives them an opportunity to tell their stories. So the scenes are quite short, and like this one. So we obviously get Maggie's driving the scene, and Maggie is basically just saying about how she thought she'd be safe, because that's the assumption when it comes to prison, because you just assume that they're behind bars and they'll be safe because they've got people around there, but that's not the case. In fact, a lot of people, about 80% of people with mental health issues in women aren't identified in prison, so they're treated really roughly and poorly, and they're not treated accordingly. So in this scene, we see that Maggie's really confused about what happened. She's searching for a note, anything that she can have about her daughter, but the police officer has no information because she's not been given the correct information from the local station. So she's walked in here with no information. She can come off quite cold and very unsympathetic, and her objective in this scene was to just leave. She wanted to get out. She did not want to be there. But Maggie was her obstacle in the way that she wouldn't stop questioning her and guilt-tripping her, because that was her tactics within the scene. She was guilt-tripping her. She was constantly asking questions. So she didn't have the opportunity to leave. And her overall objective was to be seen as professional. So if she had just gotten up and left, she wouldn't be able to be professional. She wants to climb that ladder and be respected within the community. So in the scene, she just kind of ended up getting what she wanted at the end, but it was very hard to get what she wanted. And I kind of made her very aware of the fact that she was being questioned about this. So I made her body language quite uncomfortable. She was fidgeting, her eye contact was not ever really looking at Maggie. And she was like trying to grab a jacket, standing up. She wasn't stationary. Very tense in the body as well. Her face was kind of always doing something because she was stressed and she just wants to get out because she's so new to this. She doesn't do this case often, is what I found in the text. She kept trying to direct responsibility to the people on the phone. So the line she says a lot is, if you call that number, then they can help. Or she always refers back to that. And every time I did that line, I made sure it was fast-paced. I made sure it was direct, so she knew what I was trying to tell her. And that tactic eventually worked, because in the end, she got out and it was fine. But basically in the scene, it was just kind of Maggie trying to find out what happened and this police officer having not enough knowledge on it.
Great. Well, you've told me loads there, Anya. Thank you. In terms of the character, you were kind of suggesting that she's put this professional front on, so she's kind of like cold. Now I know that you're like a warm, friendly person, so how did you relate to this character in order to bring truth?
So relating to a character is really important, because that means that you can then perceive the truth from the camera or the performance. And one thing that I relate with is wanting to be respected. So what I did was I used like the magic if, which is a Stanislavski technique, and I thought, like, what if I was in her situation? Like, what if I wanted that respect? So I took what I emotionally know from wanting respect into my character. So when I was saying my lines, like, she was very direct, Maggie was going on about all these deep things about her daughter and her granddaughter, but she never actually replies to Maggie about that. She just says, look, if you call that number, they can help. So what I did was I kept a professional front by thinking, how would I stand in this situation and how would I want to get out by looking professional, which is by not making it too obvious, but wanting to move. And then also, I used Uta Hagen's method of her W's. So, like, why was I feeling like this way and stuff like that. So, like, for example, like, why did she want to be respected? And that's because one of the themes is community and justice. So she needs to represent, because the town's so small, she needs to represent community, keeping it all together, being this responsible person. And then like what she was thinking about how to do that. So I was thinking about what can I do to make people think that that's what she wants. So like I said, I apply it into my body language and my text and my voice. And then I just kind of used units to like separate down the page about how I would be feeling if each of these things were asked to me or were presented to me, but I wanted to remain professional. So the units just really helps break down when the emotional change happened, which was mainly just her thought process. So when her thoughts changed, and most of the time her thought was, I want to get out. So a lot of her units are just kind of around, right, she's thinking this, needs to get out now. So I was thinking, like, this unit represents the more she's getting more frustrated to want to leave. So I kind of applied that as well, like the frustration of wanting to get out, but somebody's still talking to you. So I was like, how would I feel if she was still talking to me and I felt like I just wanted to go? So like I said, just apply it to my body and my voice and all the techniques I used within that.
Fab. Ebony. So on your set, that she felt that your character was driving the scene. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your character. What did you discover about her?
So when I was like looking into Maggie as a character, I kind of seen her as a bit of a needy person. She always seems to be looking for an answer to something. Like in all of her lines, like everything almost ends with a question mark. Like she just keeps asking questions, and then obviously her questions are not being answered by the police officer. But I think she's asking these questions because she wants this support, and she just wants somebody to speak to. She wants a conversation, and she's kind of like, she keeps, like every time the conversation is getting shut down, she's asking another question to hold it out for longer, but it's not working, and she keeps trying and trying and trying to kind of keep the police officer just there, because it's clear she doesn't really have anybody in the house or anybody there for her in general other than the granddaughter. So maybe Maggie is quite a lonely person, and she seems very talkative as well. She wanted to know a bit about the police officer's life. She was asking how old she was asking, is it usually this difficult? And like, it's clear that her head's a little bit all over the place. You know, she's just found out that her daughter's died, but she clearly isn't handling the news well, because yeah, she's upset, but she's asking other questions, and then she's talking about her transportation to the prison and how she's claustrophobic, and like weird details like that she's just speaking about because she's just obviously rambling on to have a conversation.
Does that feed into the objective you were playing?
Yeah, I think.
Tell me about that.
The objective that I said that Maggie would be doing is that she wants support. She just wants somebody to speak to, and her rambling on about her train journey and how she doesn't get the tube and she's not got it in years is her, you know, just looking for somebody to speak to about like anything really.
So if you had to phrase it, Maggie wants, what would you put?
Support.
Maggie wants support. So and then the tactics you've been saying, it's like keeping the conversation going. But in terms of then the obstacle, talk
The
about
obstacle, I'd say the obstacle is the police officer shutting the conversation down, because the police officer's quite cold. I mean, maybe she's just being professional, but it comes across as quite cold. When Maggie's asking these things, sometimes there's like a silence, and then Maggie has to say something again. Like, she'll say something, there'll be like a silence, and she says, so did you meet her? She has to initiate like the next bit of conversation because she's not being responded to.
So Anya talked about her take on the I guess the politics of the play, why the playwright wrote it,
Yeah.
what she's trying to say. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think our thoughts are quite similar, because when we looked into the play, like, we found that this scene was based on like an experience that happened with like a family, where the police officer had come and they said the sister's name wrong, and they couldn't confirm whether she was alive or dead. And then in this scene, the police officer called Janine Julie. And then like I looked into like statistics and things like that, and how like women's mental health and stuff in prisons is not taken seriously, and like there's this big issue with like the authorities as well, and especially in like the time that we think this was set in like the early 2000s, there was a big issue like politically with, you know, prisons and mental health, and women's mental health doesn't get taken seriously as well, and it's clear that when they're in prison it's not a priority, and a lot of women are in prison due to poverty as well, and sometimes they can't like afford to pay the fine, so then they'll go into prison, and you know then that's an issue, and sometimes they're in prison, they've been arrested, or they'll have had the fine because they'll have stolen or they'll have done something, and it's usually to help provide for their family, and then taking them away from their family is just going to make their mental health worse.
Yeah, so it feels like you've got a real kind of grasp on why this is an important piece of theatre and highlighting social injustice. But then in terms of you as an actor, so you're one of the instruments the writer's got in order to say that. What was your process as an actor?
Well, obviously to try and connect with Maggie's character, I try to find ways that me and her were similar, and I often see myself reaching out for reassurance with other people. Like, I think I'm a little bit of a people pleaser sometimes, and you know sometimes I want to have a conversation with people, and I want to, you know, it's quite obvious sometimes people don't want to speak to you, but I'll keep on speaking. So in that way I thought I was a little bit connected with the situation with like her daughter killing herself. I didn't relate to that, but I tried to find ways that I could relate to that, with having family members that have been in prison, having family members that have died, nobody that's killed themselves, but you know, I tried to like connect with that. And then this sense of like loneliness that she has, it kind of made me think of how I felt in lockdown, so I tried to, you know, connect that into the piece.
Great, so a question for both of you then. Is there anything that I've not asked but you would like to talk about?
I would just kind of say that the play was written in 2010, or like first performed in 2010, and since then it's been considered a great piece because the issues are still happening, so it's kind of like we're trying to relate back to that and how the play is actually significantly important to remember, because that issue is still happening now, but like 4 years later on, as the article that we read, it was like 4 years later on, all these things are still happening in a prison. Someone like, there's about a few people had killed themselves in like the space of like 12 months, like women who killed themselves in the space of 12 months, but it wasn't really talked about, and there's only been really slow progression about it. So the play itself is important because of the messages behind that and how we need to apply that now to our society, because it's still getting dealt with very quickly.
Another thing was we tried to kind of like guess where the play was set. It was a little bit difficult, but I think with Maggie saying that it took her 4.5 hours to get to the prison, and on about, she mentioned like tubes in Euston, we kind of said that she wasn't living anywhere near London, and we guessed like she was living in like a council estate, like a council house, and a small house as well. And like she was obviously really struggling, but we said somewhere like maybe like Liverpool or something like that, or just like a really small town. And then
Can I just ask how you came to that kind of?
What about the small town? Or?
Yeah, the council house, and what was you thinking?
Well, I was thinking, with her mentioning the fact that she looks after her granddaughter and her granddaughter's quite young, this was just an assumption that I thought that Maggie is a lot older, so she mustn't be working. I mean, she might be to make ends meet, but I'm assuming she isn't working. With her daughter being in prison as well, maybe Maggie was just having her little simple life beforehand, and now she's had to take on the responsibility of grandmother and now mother and carer to the grandchild, that her life has like drastically changed, and now she has to provide not only for herself but for the granddaughter, and to live in like a council estate and a council house is cheaper than it is to rent from like a landlord or anything like that. And then I was just taking that from like, that's something that my mum does. My mum looks after her grandchildren, and like I've seen the way that it is a struggle, and your life does change, and your finances are impacted by then having to take on your grandchildren. So that's just something that I guessed.
And then with the one of the lines for the police officer was they ring the local station. So the local station just kind of refers that it's not a massive town, like there's not a big police station, and she said that they're pushed on numbers, which also refers there's not a lot of people working there, or they're quite unemployed, so there's not that many people contributing in the community. So she's a part of that local station, and she comes out for Maggie to tell her that, because the one she has to travel to get there, Maggie has to travel to see her daughter in like that facility, because there's not a facility in that town that could have any prisoners there or mental institutions or anything like that. So it kind of infers it's quite a small town, that she has to travel so far to get there because there's nothing around her for like miles, or like just not very local. And that's another thing about community, why the police officer is important for that. She's important for like showing the psychological and emotional traumas through like interviews and stuff. And because it's a small community, you don't want things to get out of hand, and you still want to be respected. So that's why it's that.
And then as well, how she mentioned she's like claustrophobic and everything. If she was living in a big city, she'd have to become used to getting on the tube, getting on the buses, and being in like a small environment with lots of people. So her being claustrophobic would make sense if she's living in a smaller village, because she's probably not coming into contact with lots of people, and there's probably not many times where she has to get on like a crammed bus or anything like that, because she can probably walk everywhere. And if she, as well, she clearly doesn't drive, because if she did drive, she wouldn't be getting 2 buses and 2 trains for 4.5 hours. So yeah.